people see one line or one figure and have an explanation for it. Many people think in the theories about extraterrestrials who built the geoglyphs.
In the middle of a Peruvian desert, a 70-meter killer whale is carved into the ground, holding what looks like a knife. For 1,500 years, it lay there, erased by wind, sand, and time. Then an artificial intelligence pointed at the empty desert and said, "There's something here."
Researchers believe this AI-driven approach could revolutionize archaeology.
What it found doesn't just add a few new lines in the sand. It might completely change what we think the Nazca were trying to say before their world collapsed. The desert that shouldn't make sense. The Nazca Plateau in southern Peru looks, at first glance, like a place where nothing should last. It's one of the driest places on Earth. Almost no rain, no forests, just wind, rock, and dust. And yet, across this barren landscape stretch hundreds of straight lines, giant trapezoids, spirals, and animal figures as long as skyscrapers laid on their side. From the ground, most of them are just faint discolorations, but from the air, they explode into view. Hummingbirds, monkeys, spiders, condors, dogs, humans, and that knife-wielding whale. The Nazca Lines were first flown over in the 1920s. Since then, pilots, surveyors, and archaeologists have slowly mapped what they could see. Some early researchers thought they were irrigation channels. Others believed they were astronomical calendars, pointing at solstices and star positions. A few fringe theories even claimed they were alien landing strips. The truth turned out to be stranger and more human than that. Over the 20th century, systematic surveys showed that the lines weren't random. Many radiate from ancient ceremonial centers and appear to align with hills, springs, and pathways. But even with airplanes and satellite photos, researchers had a problem. They were still mostly limited to what human eyes could easily spot. Subtle figures eroded into hillsides, half destroyed by erosion, roads, or construction, often vanished into noise. And survey teams could only cover so much ground before time, budgets, and weather forced them to stop. So, archaeology did what it had always done. It kept adding new Nazca figures slowly, one field season at a time, while massive stretches of desert remained visually empty. Until a Japanese university and a technology company decided to let machine learning stare at the sand. The digital awakening. In the late 2010s and early 2020s, archaeologists from Yamagata University teamed up with researchers from IBM to try something new. Instead of relying only on human pattern recognition, they trained an AI model on high-resolution satellite images and drone photos of the Nazca Plateau. They fed it labeled examples of known geoglyphs, birds, animals, geometric shapes, and had it learn the subtle textural and tonal differences between natural ground and ancient human-made lines. The process was careful and iterative. First, the AI scanned massive images, sliding a window over the desert and assigning a probability to each patch that it contained part of a geoglyph. When that probability spiked, the system highlighted candidate shapes, faint curves, straight segments, or clusters that might belong to something larger. Human researchers then reviewed these hits, discarding false alarms and stitching the most promising fragments into possible figures. Finally, archaeologists visited many of these locations in person or with drones to confirm whether the shapes were real geoglyphs rather than shadows, erosion marks, or modern tracks. In just a few months, this human-machine partnership identified more than 300 previously unknown figurative geoglyphs scattered across the landscape, a number that had taken conventional surveys decades to approach. Importantly, the AI did not literally decode a secret message or magically read Nazca writing. What it did was reveal patterns, where certain types of figures clustered, how they related to ancient trails, and how different styles were distributed in space. Those patterns would change how archaeologists interpreted the Nazca Lines. The hidden people of Nazca. Before the AI surveys, most people associated Nazca with a handful of famous figures: the hummingbird, the monkey, the spider, the condor. They are large, clear, and easy to show in textbooks and documentaries. But many of the newly discovered geoglyphs were very different. Researchers began to distinguish between two main categories. The first were line-type geoglyphs, huge drawings made by removing the dark gravel on the surface and exposing lighter soil beneath. These are the iconic, large-scale figures, often placed on flat plateaus. The second were relief-type geoglyphs, smaller, more subtle figures created along slopes, hillsides, and especially near ancient paths and trails. From the air, they can be faint and distorted, but up close they often appear as rough outlines of animals, people, or trophy heads. When the AI mapped these relief-type figures, a striking pattern appeared. They tended to cluster near routes that connected villages in the river valleys to the major ceremonial site of Kawachi, a sacred center where the Nazca gathered for rituals and offerings. Instead of being randomly sprinkled across the desert, many of these small figures seem to mark places where people actually moved, along footpaths, near resting spots, at the approaches to ritual areas. Some depict wild animals, pumas, birds, whales, snakes. Others show human-like figures, sometimes with exaggerated heads, or carrying what look like trophies or weapons. To several researchers, including members of the Yamagata team, this suggested something powerful. The Nazca Lines might form a two-level communication system. A two-level message to gods and humans. In this interpretation, still a hypothesis, but one supported by the AI's pattern mapping, the Nazca Desert wasn't just a random open-air gallery. It functioned as a layered ritual landscape. The huge lines, trapezoids, and gigantic animals on the flat plateaus were built on a scale that made sense from above, where they could be seen by gods, spirits, or any being imagined to look down from the sky. These colossal designs worked like offerings on a cosmic billboard, prayers written in geometry and symbol. At the same time, the smaller relief-type figures that ran along the trails were meant for human eyes. Pilgrims walking toward Kawachi or moving between valleys would pass these images, witnessing scenes of animals, hunters, and ancestors, and being quietly reminded of shared myths, taboos, and rituals. The AI didn't invent this idea. Human archaeologists had already speculated that the Nazca Lines might be connected to processions, pilgrimages, and ritual movement. What the machine did was make that pattern undeniable. By rapidly cataloging the positions and types of figures over a huge area, it helped show that certain geoglyph styles were consistently placed along routes, not randomly in the middle of nowhere. Still, even this two-level model doesn't fully answer the oldest question of all. Why did the Nazca invest so much effort into carving their world into a giant ritual map? For that, scientists had to look not just at lines and shapes, but at climate, soil, and water. When the sky turned against them. Pollen samples, sediment cores, and other environmental studies from the Nazca region suggest a troubling story. For long periods, the Nazca people managed to survive in this extreme desert by building ingenious underground aqueducts known as puquios, channeling groundwater to their fields. They grew crops on narrow green ribbons of land between otherwise lifeless hills. But evidence points to episodes of severe climate instability, likely linked to powerful El Niño events in the Pacific Ocean. These could trigger torrential rains in the Andes, causing catastrophic floods that ripped through the valleys, destroyed irrigation works, and buried fields in sediment and stones. At the same time, there's evidence that the Nazca cut down large swaths of native trees like the huarango, which helped stabilize soils and trap moisture. Deforestation may have made their agricultural system even more vulnerable to erosion and drought. Some researchers now argue that the Nazca Lines and geoglyphs are deeply tied to this escalating ecological crisis. In this view, again, a leading but debated theory, the lines, shapes, and figures were part of a vast effort to negotiate with a changing world. Long lines and trapezoids may trace out processional routes where communities walked in ritual, pleading for rain and protection. The animal figures could represent water and fertility-related beings, with whales and fish pointing toward the ocean, birds toward the sky, and monkeys and felines toward forested regions that once seemed more abundant. Meanwhile, the human and trophy head figures may reflect rituals of sacrifice and ancestral veneration, appeals directed to powers beyond the visible world. The Nazca, in other words, may have been carving their prayers into the earth as their environment became more unpredictable and fragile. And now, more than a millennium later, an AI is helping us finally see the full extent of that desperate artwork, just as it faces a new threat from roads, mines, and modern construction. An unfinished map.
Even with hundreds of geoglyphs documented, archaeologists are convinced we still haven't seen the whole story.
The AI-powered surveys have already doubled the number of known figurative figures in some areas, and its probability maps highlight dozens to hundreds of promising locations that teams haven't had time to verify on the ground. Some of these candidate sites may be illusions, tricks of light, erosion, or modern activity. Others may be genuine geoglyphs that have faded to the edge of visibility, waiting for one more careful survey before they disappear for good under roads, farms, or urban sprawl. New tools are joining the search: higher resolution satellites, drones with multispectral cameras, and 3D terrain models that strip away shadows and perspective distortion. Each new layer of data makes subtle human-made patterns easier to separate from nature's chaos. But the core dynamic remains the same. A civilization in crisis once carved its fears, prayers, and identities into the desert, leaving a record they could never fully explain. Centuries later, we arrived, puzzled by their work and unsure how to read it. Now, our own machines are helping us interpret more of that vast, unfinished message, not by solving it like a simple code, but by showing us where to look and just how much we have been missing.
In the end, AI didn't crack a perfect hidden sentence left by the Nazca. It did something more unsettling.
It revealed how much of the human past can vanish in plain sight, and how much of it is still there, written across the earth, waiting for the moment when someone, or something, finally learns how to see it.